Hi there, BookTube. It's Ros. It's early May, and time to do a bit of a wrap-up of the things I read in April. And I finished 17 books in April. So if I were to talk about all of those in detail, this would be a hopelessly long video, ridiculous. So what I will do is I'll mention all of them, but talk more about ones that I haven't talked about at more length in another video. So where should we start? Well, I should start by saying that 17 isn't strictly speaking true. I read more than 17 books, but a number of the books that I read were picture books. Now, there's two reasons for that. One is that my lovely grandson is old enough now to start really enjoying picture books, and he came to visit. But also because April is the month of the Readathon Picture This, when Shelley and Jack encourage us to, as adults, think about the beauty, the joy, the delights of picture books, and that we can still appreciate them even when we're grown-ups. And so one of those 17 books was a picture book, because I kind of counted this one, which was the new book that I bought myself this month for myself and for him. And it's When the Storks Came Home, and it's about it's kind of a story, but built around the reintroduction of the white stork to the UK, which is happening successfully in a couple of places, including Knepp, which is not too far from me. And I love this book because it has the most beautiful pictures of birds in it, storks and other birds. And because it was Picture This, I suppose, I was reflecting a bit more about what I like in a picture book. And I've got a couple of others to show, to sort of just share the picture book joy yes, I picked out because of those reflections, because I realised that I do particularly like a picture book that has sort of the natural world in it, animals in the natural world and landscape and nature. I realise that is something that draws me in particularly to a picture book. And here's one of my all-time absolute favourites, Owl Babies, by Martin Waddell and illustrated by Patrick Benson. And it has the just lovely illustrations of tawny owls in it. And it's full of such drama. And they go very, very beautifully with the words. And, I always hope for some lovely words, lovely language in a picture book too, because I feel like children deserve our very best language. Even if it's short, it should be carefully chosen. But yeah, a magic book. Thinking about that combination of words and pictures, we're going on a bear hunt by Michael Rosen, illustrated by Helen Oxenbury, has the most tremendous words, because they're based on a traditional children's rhyme or game. When I was a little child, we used to do it as we're going on a lion hunt, and it's a fun thing to do with children. What this book does is he polished those words to be even more delightful, to still go with the actions, to still go with that sense of fun, and then combine them with the illustrations that are a kind of almost idyllic version of the English countryside, and that brings the story and the words to life and gives you just so much detail. And this is possibly my favourite, because it's mud flats. And when I was a child, I used to go and stay somewhere that had mud flats sort of along those lines. And, you get your feet down in them. And yeah. So the last one that I'm going to show you is this one, which is less well known than those two, I think. And that's The Little House by the Sea by Benedict Blathwayt. And this is about a house, and what I think is probably a Scottish island, or certainly on the coast of Scotland. And it's full of lovely images from nature and the beach. Ooh, we've got some seals there. And, it's a little ruined house, and it's been taken over by nature. You know, you can see all the birds that use it, and then the sheep wander in, and you know, it's a haven. There's lapwings in that picture, and Canada geese, and herring gulls. But then someone comes to rebuild and restore the house. Look. And that excludes all those animals and birds. But then he realises and he invites them in, and the house becomes a haven and a welcoming place for the animals again. And it's a lovely sort of metaphor, I suppose, for how perhaps we can make space for nature despite the need to have places to live. And a precious book and very beautiful. I enjoy books about nature generally, and I was very happy that the People April group read that we chose for this year was a book that combines memoir with that joy and appreciation of the natural world. And the book that we picked was Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton. And it's a memoir of someone who finds a leveret baby hare and adopts it and raises it, and you know, without domesticating it. I love that book. I made a video with Brian and Elizabeth, the two other People April hosts, all about it, so I won't say any more other than to just say I strongly recommend it. Now, another People April book that I read this month, which I want to say a bit more about because I haven't in another video, and because it's a rather special book in itself and a special book to me, and that's this one, Nishga by Jordan Abel. Now, why is this a special book? One, because it's quite unique in the way that it's written, but it's particularly special to me because it was a present from Sean of Sean Bree's Books. He knew that I would love it, and he found a second-hand copy to post to me from Canada to the UK so I could read it, because it's not available in the UK. So if you're watching this in the UK or Europe, you probably won't be able to get hold of this book, but just nevertheless take a moment with me to appreciate it. And if you live in Canada or North America, then you know, rush out and read it if you are interested in moving and unusual books that are autobiographical, because this was a People April choice. Abel is his sort of heritage on his father's side is Nishga, so that's a people of the west coast of what is now Canada, northwest coast. But Abel himself doesn't speak Nishga. He's cut off from that culture. He has very little contact with that side of his family. Why is that? It's essentially, as he explains, because of the Canadian residential school system that took Indigenous children away from their families and placed them in horrendous boarding schools and prevented them from speaking their own languages, and destroyed their childhoods really, and the sort of intergenerational ripple of trauma from that has done so much damage. And that's what he's writing about in this book, and how that's left a hole in his life. But because he's a poet, he expresses that in through poetry, but unusual poetry, in that this book it's full of also of found objects, illustrations, found texts, transcripts of lectures that he's given. It's not sort of, as I say, standard poetry, but it's very beautiful and very moving, and it leaves you both sad and feeling a huge sense of both sorrow and outrage for Abel and all of those in that position of having sort of lost what should be a big chunk of their identity. There you go. Another very moving thing that I read this month which was also a People April book, was a play, and that's the Laramie Project. It's by Moisés Kaufman and the Tectonic Theatre Company. I came to it because of Angelia's Endless Drama read-along. I'll link to details of that below. So reading plays every month. It's documentary drama. That's why it worked also as a People April choice. It's based on interviews with residents of Laramie, Wyoming, that the theatre company sort of went and made not long after the homophobic murder of student Matthew Shepard in 1998 in Laramie, Wyoming, and it's sort of exploring and exposing that, I suppose. I'm not a teary reader as a rule, I mean, I may be moved, but it's unusual for me to have, to actually have, tears flooding down my face. The Laramie Project had that impact for me, and I wish that I could think that things are different today. That was 1998, and in 2025, the same thing couldn't happen, and people's responses to it couldn't be as complex and difficult as they were. Yeah. Moving on. I read 3 graphic memoirs for People April, and I did a video specifically about the 3 of them and then other graphic memoirs and why I enjoy graphic memoir as a form. One of those was very jolly. Relish was about food, someone's life, the author, Lucy Knisley's life in food and meals and cooking. But the other 2 were more moving. In fact, again, a bit of a theme here of sad things I read. Well, the first one, When Stars Are Scattered, by Victoria Jamieson and Omar Mohamed, is about Mohamed's childhood growing up in a huge refugee camp in Kenya, and so you'd expect that to be a moving book, and it was lovely, and it's written for sort of so that you could read it as a sort of middle grade reader or up to adulthood, The one that surprised me by being quite emotional was NonNonBa by Shigeru Mizuki. He was one of the founders of manga, and this is a sort of a memoir of his childhood. It's often funny. It's full of vitality and some brilliant monsters or yokai that he uses in the story. But it also had some very emotional moments that quite took me by surprise. Anyway, I won't say more because I did a video about those 3. But this does make me think that I think I'm perhaps more likely to be acutely moved by books that are autobiographical or biographical. Something about knowing that this is real pain that is being described, not an author using fiction to make me see or hear something moving, although that is something I really appreciate. But it's more likely to really sort of bring the emotion absolutely to the fore if it's biographical or autobiographical. However, there is a novel that I read this month which had as kind of strong an impact on me emotionally as the autobiographical things that I read, and that was Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell. Now, it's a novel about a woman who's living in a relationship of coercive control, and reading it, I felt scared and tense and just really worried on behalf of the protagonist in quite a visceral way, to the point where actually I put it to one side initially and didn't carry on reading it. But I did finish reading it, and I'm going to be making a video, I hope, next week with Tilly talking about it together. So I will say no more about it, but wait for that video if you're interested. But a very good book. Another book that was emotional in a different way, because of who the author is and how she writes, was one of the older things that I read this month, and that was Night and Day by Virginia Woolf. It was her second novel. It came out in 1919. It's set kind of in the period sort of a bit before World War One in London, and it's kind of a coming of age sort of book, and the emotion in it is I mean, being Woolf, it's quite subtly done, but it's about attraction and confusion in love and poor communication and frustration. And I mean, in the UK, it was a time of great kind of change in society, I suppose, but the expectations on women was still quite limiting, and that's what Woolf really sort of conveys in the book. It's not my favourite Woolf novel, but that said, it was still one of the absolute best things I read this month, and that's Virginia Woolf for you. The descriptions are amazing, the dialogue is so sharp, it's sometimes very funny. It's a kind of mordant wit that she brings to her writing, and just perfect sentences, perfect paragraphs. So yeah, but if you're starting out on Virginia Woolf, don't start there, I suppose. But it's possibly her least read, least liked novel. But I would still say, if you're a Woolf enthusiast, not one to miss. It's a beauty. I read 3 other jolly good novels this month, I would say, and funnily enough, without me planning it that way, they were all historical fiction. One was Loot by Tanya James, came out in 2023. We start in 18th century India, sort of southern India, court of Tipu Sultan, with a teenage craftsman, Abbas, and Tipu Sultan commissions an automaton, like a model that moves, kind of life size, of a tiger eating a British soldier. It's kind of a bit of a joke, but a bit of a sort of, a political thing, because he was fighting the East India Company. And it's a real item, actually, that is, you can see it in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London to this day. But that was the sort of inspiration for the story. It later moves to France and then to England. The whole thing is good. It's like a solidly good historical fiction, I would say. It doesn't blow the world away, but it's well worth a read if you're a historical fiction reader. I would say very much the same for The Safekeep by Jael van der Woerden. I have talked about this one in another video, so I will say less, but it's set in the Netherlands in sort of middle of the 20th century. It's kind of draws on the events or impact of World War II in the Netherlands, and a sort of a dark period in Dutch history, but it's also about relationships and family, and it's complicated. A solidly good book, again, without being sort of like a 5-star read for me, although a winner of many prizes or many prize shortlists. Of the 3, I'd say in many ways the most ambitious and interesting of these 3 historical fiction novels that I read was The Heart in Winter by Kevin Barry. He's an Irish writer, but it's set in Montana in the 19th century, and sort of late 19th century, and in a mining town. And our protagonist, Tom, is he's a drinker. He's like a doper, as they called it then. He takes opium. He has a job, but he has a bit of a side hustle, writing letters for miners who want to try and persuade a woman to come out west and marry them. And one of these brides arrives, and Tom and she kind of almost accidentally fall in love, but kind of a mad, crazy passion. And we move into that kind of Western classic plot line of The Chase. But this is not written in your sort of typical well, what do I know about westerns? They're not something I really read, but it's unusual in its style, I suppose. Quite lyrical, almost flowery. Great dialogue. Don't go looking for too many punctuation bits to help you. It's a bit stream of consciousness at times. Really, I enjoyed it a lot. I liked the style a lot, but oddly, I was enjoying almost the tour de force of the writing so much that I was a bit detached from the characters. Given that it's kind of like a love story and has a sort of a thriller chase element, I was less emotionally engaged than one might have expected. I don't know if you've read it. Tell me if you thought the same or if you thought differently. There we go. The last bit of fiction that I'm going to talk about is not a novel. It was short stories. This, A Sunny Place for Shady People by Mariana Enriquez, translated by Megan McDowell, was our Reading the Globe contemporary choice for the month of April. Reading the Globe readathon that I'm jointly hosting, or the contemporary bit of it, with Katya of Page Turners with Katya. Katya and I talked about this book in a live show, which is now up on Katya's channel, so I'll link to that. This was not my favourite of the 4 books we've read so far for Reading the Globe fiction, which doesn't mean to say that it wasn't a good book. It is a good book, but it's short stories and it's kind of horror, supernatural, bit of body horror. So it had to work hard to make me feel it was a really good book, because that's not my sort of thing. But if that is your sort of thing, you would probably lap this up, because it is actually very well written. And there are some images from this which will stick in my mind, perhaps forever. I almost wish they wouldn't, it being horror. But yeah, well worth a read. She's from Argentina. I didn't say that, did I? Where are we now? That was all the fiction. So, but I did want to say that there was another reading event in April called Spring into Adventure. It's actually carrying on into May, so I will put more details about it in the show notes. But some of the things that I read in April, I was sort of counting in my head, or particularly picked out, because they would also be Spring into Adventure books. Loot was one. The Heart in Winter was another. It just seemed to sort of fit really well with that sort of spring into adventure sort of adventurous theme. But also one of my People April books I went for partly to be because it had an adventure quality, and that was Syria, the Desert and the Sun by Gertrude Bell. Now, it's a People April book because it's a memoir. It's actually like a travel journal of a journey that she made in 1905 through what was then the Ottoman province of Syria, so would now be parts of Jordan, Lebanon and Syria, the modern day states. And she starts out sort of in Jerusalem and crosses the Jordan, and Bell was the most extraordinary woman. Do look her up and find out more about her life. She just, those kind of larger than life characters. You think, wow, what a life. She grew up as a sort of, Victorian lady. She became a mountaineer and a traveller and a writer and an archaeologist, a great linguist, an Arabist. And then after the Second World War, she became, or during it, the First World War, she became like a kind of political officer for the British government in the West Asia, Middle East. She became a strong advocate for establishing Arab states after World War I in that area. She was involved in establishing Iraq as well. She was, I suppose, it's those fascinating people, I suppose, that she loved the people and the language and the cultures and the history and the landscape and just everything about that part of the world. But because, she was part of the British sort of imperial kind of machine in a way, some of the things that she advocated for may not have been so wise. And there's a certain poignancy in reading the book now and knowing that many of the places that she went, many of the sort of cultures that she describes, particular, it was a very varied area at that time in terms of religious groups and, you know, war and conflict and religious sort of fundamentalism, I suppose, ISIS and so on, have really changed, even just in recent years, some of the things that she saw and she writes about. Yeah, interesting book. Not terribly stylish, if you know what I mean. It's just sort of standard travel journal, but perceptive, I think. Now, reading a travel memoir is pretty sort of that's definitely my comfort zone. It's the kind of thing that I read, and you know, people have a good excuse to read one. I read a couple of books that were a bit further out of my comfort zone or more unusual for me, but People April was the excuse for reading them, and that was 2 collections of autobiographical essays. Now, does that sound a bit dry, an autobiographical essay? Well, it shouldn't. Neither of these books were dry at all, and I'm really pleased to read them. They were also both sort of quite succinct and very thoughtful. Deborah Levy, in Things I Don't Want to Know, her collection of essays, writes beautiful, beautiful style about her experiences that made her become a writer, which is always an interesting topic, isn't it? And probably the most sort of striking or moving section of the book is the essay that's about the period in her childhood when her father was imprisoned in South Africa, where they lived, because he was involved in these anti-apartheid movement, and the impact that had on her as a small child. Yeah, I really would enthusiastically recommend it. The other, Notes to Self by Emily Pine, was even more personal, I suppose, as a collection of essays. It's and political with a small p, because she's writing about miscarriage and infertility and caring for an alcoholic parent, you know, and you know, if that sounds a bit melodramatic, no, she writes very honestly, but she's a very sort of robust writer. She doesn't wallow in writing about those topics. Yeah, say both collections of essays, real spot on, successful for me. Now, I'm going to come to the last book that I'm going to talk about. And if you were going to ask me for, you know, a genre of writing that I would think, oh, that's not for me, that's not something I read, okay, essays might be unusual, but, you know, something that I would say, oh, definitely not a Ros thing, is reading true crime. And yet, when I heard that this book, Story of a Murder by Hallie Rubenhold, was coming out last month, I was rushed to get hold of it, and the library came up trumps, hurrah. Because why? Because Hallie Rubenhold writes just the most tremendous history books, but shaped around or you know, the starting point of a crime. So because, as she says, crimes generate a lot of documentation, records that you can delve into, and she's a social historian, and you know, they give her a lot of material to draw on. Now, but let's be honest with ourselves. There is also a fascination about the things that people have done and will do to each other. Yeah, that you know, I'm sure that's why her books sell so well as being, you know, very sort of solid, well researched, you know, meticulously referenced, all of that. Look at this. This is Belle Elmore, and she was the second wife of Dr. Crippen, and he murdered her, chopped her up, buried her remains, the bits he hadn't burnt, under the floor of the cellar in the house where he lived, and the warm-hearted centre of this story is Belle's friends, her other women who were involved in the music hall scene in the UK and the USA, and those women friends refused to accept that she could have just disappeared, and it was only because of their persistence that her murder was finally revealed and investigated. There you go. So that was my splendid April, and as ever, I would love to hear about yours, but I'll cut off now because this is too long already.